Now, the idea of natural equivalence in translation is a simple one, but when we discuss it as a term and/or theory, it can become quite complex. This can be seen in the various articles regarding its existence, form, and level at which it functions. It's within this variety where things get complex because of the different perspectives it's viewed from. So, to better understand the theory of natural equivalence, we first need to explore where it comes from. In the second half of the 20th century, there was a strong line of thought among European linguists, particularly translation linguists or theorists, that different languages express different worldviews. For example, the word foot in English has a value because it doesn't indicate any other body part and it doesn't refer to the leg. However, in Gaelic, the word cos indicates the foot and the leg. These relations between terms were viewed as structures. Hence, this line of thinking was called structuralism. It said that we should study these relationships rather than trying to analyse the things themselves. So, from this we can conclude that the words foot and cos have different values. Now, if this is to be the same for every term in a language pair, and languages express different worldviews, then nothing should be translatable and equivalence isn't possible. Now, if this was the case, well then why did translators exist and produce work that was useful to the end client and or end user? It seemed that either translation didn't exist or that the theory of structuralism was inadequate. It's this notion of inadequacy that spurred the development of theories of equivalence. Now, among clients, end users and translators, natural equivalence is often presumed to exist even before the act of translating is completed. In other words, it's presumed that what we can say in one language can have the same value, worth, or function when translated into another. Now, if we look at the definition of equivalent, we can see that it can mean equal in value, force, or meaning. In translation, the theory of equivalence doesn't say that languages are the same, but that values can be the same. In this way, equivalence views the source and target texts as possibly having a relationship of equal value. Now, it's important to stress here that it doesn't mean that this relationship is between the two texts in their entirety, but rather that a relationship of equal value is possible on some level. Now, on which level the value lies is up for discussion and is unique to each text. For example, the value may be in the text's usefulness to their respective end users, their aesthetic qualities, their length, form, and or function. But what do we mean by the form or function of a translation? Well, let's take the superstition around Friday the 13th as an example. It's a day that's considered to be filled with bad luck. Now, although this is believed in many Western cultures, in Spanish culture, Tuesday the 13th or Martes 13 is regarded as the unlucky day. Now, let's say that Martes 13 is the source text. We can translate this either as Tuesday the 13th or Friday the 13th. The first option can be referred to as formal equivalence because the value of the target text corresponds to the form of what is said in the source. Two words translated by two words. The second option can be called dynamic or functional equivalence because it activates the same or similar cultural function. In other words, it conveys the meaning of an unlucky day. In this example, the value can also be on the level of reference. The translation Tuesday refers to the second day of the working week, just as Martes does. Now, ideally, a translator would like to find a translation that has equal value of both form and function. Still, it may not always be possible to achieve due to differences in cultural beliefs. Nonetheless, equivalence doesn't say which kind of value is supposed to be the same, but rather that equal value can be achieved on one level or another. In this sense, both translations can be considered to have achieved equivalence. However, for equivalence to be achieved, the translator must first know the text scopus, something that will help guide them towards a translation of equal value. For instance, is the translation scopus to refer to a date on a calendar, or is it to refer to a day of bad luck? A translator should know the text scopus from their initial meeting or correspondence with the client, also known as the commissioner. Now, if you're unsure what scopus means, I've made a similar video explaining key points from the theory, so make sure to check that out. Now, even though the translator might be able to achieve equivalence, does this mean their translation can be considered a natural equivalent? Well, in the context of languages, natural can relate to the natural occurrence of a language as a form of communication through the process of use, repetition, and change without conscious planning or premeditation. Now, from this line of thinking, the translation of Martes 13 as Tuesday the 13th or Friday the 13th wouldn't be viewed as a natural equivalent because the translator views something as naturally occurring without planning or premeditation. But that's not the case. This is because the translator has marketed their skills to the client with translation needs. The client has created a text or has a text they plan to share internationally, and the translator has read the text first to understand the meaning that needs to be conveyed in the target text. Therefore, a lot of planning has gone into preparation for the text to be translated. Now, in a general sense, the word natural can be defined as something that is unaltered or untouched. Now, if we combine this understanding with what I mentioned earlier about equivalent meaning equal as in value, we can begin to understand the basis for theories of natural equivalence. They suppose that a translator sees a linguistic issue, takes hold of the value, searches around the target language and culture, and finds an item of equal value. Now, this would be viewed as natural because the equivalents are presumed to exist before the act of translating. But if the date Martes 13 is translated into another language as Tuesday or Friday the 13th, using a different morphology and spelling, is the source term untouched? It seems like it's not. But having said that, for the translator to come before the word, the translator would need to be a caveman. New words do be coined, yes, but the majority of words in a language would have been coined before the translator was born. So, in this sense, the equivalent term would exist before the act of translating. Hence, we could view the source term as being untouched. Now, this outlook can give the impression that natural equivalents are mostly the stuff of terminology, standardized words that are made to correspond to one another across languages. In turn, this would give the impression that there's a corresponding term in every target language for each term in the source language. Now, translators and linguists should know that this isn't the case. Nonetheless, it doesn't mean a natural equivalent can't be found. It means the translator may have to get creative to convey the meaning of the source text in a way that reads fluently in the target language. This introduces other theories of equivalence, also known as directional equivalence, which say that the translator is actively going to create something that did not exist in the target language before the act of translating. For example, the coining of a new term. Now, when translating, it would be wise for the translator to pursue natural equivalence over directional equivalence if possible. Otherwise, the translator risks inserting terms that have not been agreed upon or standardized, potentially resulting in confusion regarding their meaning. So, to pursue natural equivalence, the translator can use the following procedures. The first is amplification. This is when more words are used in the target text than in the source text to express the same idea. For example, the word biller doesn't exist in Gaelic. Therefore, the source must be amplified to 6 words in the target. The translation would therefore read as "and dinne a heol and billa." The second procedure is reduction. This is the opposite of amplification. So instead of increasing the number of words used, the translator will reduce the number. The next procedure is explicitation. This is when the translator specifies something that was only implicit in the source text. For instance, in my local area, it's common knowledge that a school called St. Colum's is a secondary school for boys. However, if a text relating to this school was translated into French, it may need to be specified that the school is a secondary school for boys, as it wouldn't be common knowledge in French. The opposing procedure to explicitation is implicitation. This is when the translator doesn't specify but implies. For example, if it were common knowledge that St. Colum's relates to a secondary school for boys, the translator may remove the specifications added by the author of the source text in French. The fifth procedure is generalization. This is when the translator translates a specific term as a more general term. For example, foot becomes cuss, the foot or leg. The opposite of generalization is particularization. This is simply translating a general term into a more specific term. Now, there are other procedures for maintaining natural equivalence, like the switching of grammatical categories known as transposition, as well as making adjustments for different discursive conventions known as modulation. These procedures I've mentioned serve as a reminder that translation is a process of taking and giving. The translator either takes from the source text and gives the target text more or less what was present in the source. These procedures also remind us that natural equivalence doesn't mean that the whole of the source text has to be of equal value to the whole of the target text, but rather that equal value can be achieved on some level. The very presence of these theories of natural equivalence and procedures for maintaining it is evidence that it does exist, but seemingly not without altering the text in some way, depending on how you view it. The theories of directional equivalence seemingly give the translator more creative freedom, but also add more pressure on them by requiring the coining of a new word or phrase in the hope that it will be understood by an audience reading it for the very first time. Viewing languages as having relations of equal value and pre-existing equivalence presupposes that different languages do or can express values that can be compared in some itemized way. This doesn't mean that all languages look and sound the same. However, it does assume that different languages are on the same level. Nevertheless, it's important to note that not every translator starts off reading translation literature before performing the act of translating, and theories will be challenged and revisited by those who have studied translation theories, meaning that each translator will have their own view on what equivalence means to them at the time of translating. So, what does natural equivalence mean to you, or is this the first time that you've ever heard of this theory? Let me know in the comments. I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks.